It was a chilly evening, and the city's upscale restaurant was buzzing with excitement. People were laughing, chatting, and clinking glasses as they enjoyed their evening meals. Among them was a girl who stood out, not because of her beauty or charm, but because of the way she carried herself, completely confident, or rather, completely convinced of her superiority over everyone around her. She walked in with a group of friends, her laughter echoing through the room. She wore the finest clothes, a designer outfit that cost more than most people made in a month. She was used to getting what she wanted, when she wanted, and had no hesitation in making everyone around her know just how high she thought of herself. As the group was seated at their table, the waitress came over to take their orders. She was polite, professional, and calm, doing her job like she had done countless times before. But from the moment she approached the table, the girl's attitude shifted. She barely glanced at the waitress, already dismissing her as if she were invisible. The waitress, who had been working long hours on her feet, smiled and patiently greeted the group, offering them the menu. But the girl didn't respond with a smile or kindness. Instead, she scoffed at the menu, making a sarcastic remark about how everything seemed too basic for her taste. Her friends laughed, amused by her comments. The waitress, despite the sting of the remark, remained professional. She politely asked if they were ready to order, but the girl couldn't help herself. She made another rude comment about the quality of the restaurant, mentioning that she had been to fancier places where the service was much better. The girl's tone was dripping with mockery, and her friends joined in, all of them indulging in the idea that they were somehow above everyone else in the room. The waitress, however, just nodded and quietly took their orders, knowing better than to respond. She had seen this kind of behavior before, and though it stung, she had learned long ago that her job was to stay respectful, no matter how entitled someone might act. She didn't let the harsh words affect her, though they were hard to ignore. She had a family to support, bills to pay, and a life to manage, and no amount of arrogance from someone like the girl could change that. As she walked away from the table, the girl and her friends continued to laugh and make jokes about the waitress, their voices full of superiority. The girl was completely unaware that she was about to face a lesson in humility she would never forget. The night went on, and the restaurant continued to fill with more guests, each enjoying their evening in their own way. For the girl and her friends, the night was still young, and they were ready for whatever came next. As they ate, the girl continued to make comments, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. She talked about her expensive shopping, trips, the lavish vacations she had been on, and all the high society events she attended. Her friends nodded along, agreeing with every word, creating an air of arrogance around them. The waitress, who had been quietly going about her duties, couldn't help but overhear their conversation. She was used to hearing people talk like this, but tonight, something about it felt different. She was working hard to take care of everyone, running around the restaurant, making sure that every table was happy and that all the orders were correct. Yet, it felt like her hard work was invisible, unnoticed by people like the girl at the table. The more the girl talked, the more she seemed to lose touch with the reality that so many people lived in. Her life, so full of privileges, was so different from the waitress's. Despite feeling the sting of the girl's words, the waitress stayed focused on her job. She couldn't afford to get distracted by rude customers. There was work to be done. She had a family waiting for her at home, a home that wasn't filled with luxury, but was filled with love. Her shift wasn't over yet, and she still had a dozen other tables to serve. But as the night went on, she noticed the girl beginning to get a little restless. The girl was constantly checking her phone, making faces at the food, and trying to get the attention of the staff to complain about small things. She was never satisfied, no matter how hard everyone worked to make her happy. It wasn't long before the restaurant manager, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached the table with an offer. There was an impromptu talent show happening that evening, and they were looking for a volunteer to perform on stage. The manager thought the girl, with her confident attitude and loud personality, would be perfect for the performance. The girl, eager for attention and validation, immediately agreed, not thinking for a second about what she was getting herself into. She stood up from the table, practically rushing to the stage as if she were already a star. Her friends cheered her on, clearly excited to watch her take center stage. Little did she know, this was the beginning of a lesson that would make her think twice about her behavior. As she stepped onto the stage, her confidence was about to be tested in a way she never expected. As the girl confidently walked up to the stage, her friends cheered her on, and the audience applauded, expecting something impressive. She smiled, enjoying the attention, feeling like all eyes were on her. She was used to being the center of attention, and tonight was no different. She thought this would be an easy win, just another opportunity to show off and prove her place in the spotlight. The spotlight hit her, and the crowd went quiet, eagerly awaiting her performance. She was excited, thinking she would wow everyone with her talent. But as the music started, something strange happened. She had no idea what to do. Her mind went blank. She had agreed to perform without really thinking it through. She had no plan, no practice, and no idea what was expected of her. For a moment, she stood there awkwardly, waiting for something to come to her. Her confidence started to waver as she fumbled for the right words or actions. The crowd, still expecting something amazing, began to grow restless. A few people whispered to each other, and she could hear some giggles from the audience. Her friends, who had been cheering her on, were now starting to look a little embarrassed, unsure of what to do. She tried to smile, hoping that would distract everyone from the awkwardness, but it didn't help. The more she tried to salvage the performance, the more it seemed to fall apart. As she stumbled through her performance, she could feel her face turning red. Her thoughts raced, but nothing made sense. She had no backup plan, no skill to showcase. She had gotten so caught up in the idea of impressing everyone that she hadn't even bothered to think about what she could actually do. The audience, who had been eager to see her shine, now seemed confused. The laughter started to spread. It wasn't the fun, light-hearted laughter she had hoped for. It was more like polite laughter, the kind people give when they're uncomfortable or unsure of what's happening. The girl's smile faltered and her shoulders tensed. She tried to keep going, but the more she performed, the more she felt like she was digging herself into a hole. The laughter in the room grew louder, and she could feel the stares from the audience, no longer admiring her, but wondering when she would realize that she wasn't going to win them over. She glanced at her friends, but their faces were flushed with embarrassment. They were no longer cheering her on. They were silently wishing the whole thing would end. It was at that moment that she realized this wasn't the way she wanted to be seen. This wasn't the kind of attention she had imagined. Her performance had become a joke, and the spotlight that had once felt so comforting now felt like a spotlight on her mistakes. But it wasn't over yet, and the situation was about to take a turn she never saw coming. Eumenia's the awkward performance dragged on. Something unexpected happened. The microphone, which had been working perfectly before, suddenly let out a loud screeching sound that echoed through the entire restaurant. It was a sharp, high-pitched noise that made everyone cringe. The audience, already uncomfortable from watching her struggle, couldn't help but laugh even harder. The girl froze, her face turning bright red. She quickly tried to adjust the microphone, but it only made the sound worse. Every time she touched it, the screeching grew louder, as if the microphone itself was mocking her. The laughter in the room shifted from polite chuckles to full-blown giggles. It was no longer a light-hearted moment. It was clear that the girl's performance had become a complete disaster. Her friends, who had been cheering her on just moments ago, now looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Some were even covering their faces, embarrassed by what had turned into a full-blown fiasco. The girl, once so confident, now looked completely out of place, like a fish out of water. But the worst part was the fact that the audience was no longer focused on the performance itself. They were more interested in how she would handle the situation. Would she keep going? Would she fix it? Or would she run off stage in embarrassment? It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. No one wanted to see it happen, but they couldn't look away. And through all of this, the girl's pride, which had been her armor, started to crumble. She glanced out at the crowd, her eyes desperately searching for a way to escape the disaster she had created. But the more she tried to recover, the more it seemed like everything was slipping out of her control. The microphone screeched one last time before falling silent. The girl, who had entered the stage so confidently, was now standing there, embarrassed, her head low and her posture slouched. She didn't know whether to laugh it off or to just walk off stage and forget the whole thing. But as she stood there, a deep sense of humiliation started to settle in. And then, in the midst of all the chaos, the sound of laughter from the audience reached its peak. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was a laugh of sheer disbelief, as if everyone had suddenly realized how over the top and ridiculous the whole situation had become. The girl could feel her heart racing. The spotlight that had once felt like a privilege now felt like a spotlight on her every mistake. The girl had no choice but to face it. What she had thought was a moment of glory had turned into a moment of failure, and she was beginning to understand the harsh truth. Sometimes, no amount of confidence can save you from the consequences of your actions. As the laughter died down, the girl stood frozen on stage, her mind racing. The room, which had once seemed like her stage to shine, now felt like a spotlight of embarrassment. She had no idea how to get herself out of this mess. Her performance had turned into a disaster, and every second felt like it was dragging on longer than the last. She could feel the heat in her cheeks and the weight of the stares from the audience. Her hands were shaking slightly as she fumbled with the microphone again, trying to make it stop screeching. But each time she touched it, the microphone screeched, louder, causing the audience to chuckle even more. She wished she could vanish into thin air, but all she could do was stand there, desperately trying to regain some sense of control. Her usual charm and confidence seemed to have vanished, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The more she struggled to fix the situation, the more she realized how out of place she felt. She had always been the one who had everything figured out, the one everyone looked up to and admired. But tonight, for the first time, she was the one being laughed at. Her carefully crafted image of being the perfect, untouchable person was starting to crack, and it was more than just uncomfortable. It was humiliating. The girl glanced at her friends, hoping for some support, but they were just as uncomfortable as she was. Some of them had already turned away, not wanting to be part of the spectacle. The girl's eyes flicked back to the audience, hoping to see some sign of mercy, some indication that they would stop laughing. But instead, the laughter continued. It wasn't the kind of laughter she was used to, the kind that came from her jokes or her sarcasm. No, this laughter felt different. It was the laughter of people realizing that, despite her earlier mockery of others, she was now the one being made a fool of. She tried to recover, tried to laugh it off, but it wasn't working. The audience wasn't buying it. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, and it made her stomach churn. For the first time, she realized that no matter how much money she had, no matter how many people she could impress with her flashy lifestyle, it didn't matter if she couldn't handle a simple moment like this. Her reputation, her image, it all felt fragile now. All the things she had taken for granted, the privilege, the superiority, were starting to lose their grip on her. At that moment, the girl realized something that she had never considered before. Being at the center of attention wasn't always about shining. Sometimes it was about being humbled. And this moment, this painful moment on stage, was about to teach her a lesson she would carry with her long after the laughter stopped. The microphone finally fell silent, but the damage was already done. The girl, standing awkwardly in the middle of the stage, felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her. The laughter had softened, but the sting of embarrassment remained. She was no longer the confident girl who had walked into the restaurant just hours ago, proud and full of herself. Now she was a mess, with her thoughts racing, her face flushed, and her heart pounding. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. She stood there, trying to gather herself, but her mind felt like it was in chaos. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had always been the one in control, the one who could make people laugh and get them to admire her. But now, All of that seemed like it was slipping away. She looked out at the crowd, hoping for some sign of sympathy, some acknowledgement that they understood it wasn't her fault the microphone had malfunctioned. But instead, all she could see were faces that had once admired her, now watching her, with a mix of amusement and pity. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a step back from the microphone, her eyes scanning the room. The audience wasn't angry, but they were amused. The situation had turned into something almost ridiculous, and the girl could feel every ounce of her pride crumbling. She had thought this night would be another chance to show off, another moment to feel superior. But instead, it had become a humbling lesson in humility. As she stood there, her thoughts began to shift. The girl realized that maybe the world wasn't as easy to control as she had always believed. Maybe being a show-off and acting superior wasn't the way to earn respect. She had spent so much time building an image of herself as someone who had it all. But tonight, she had seen how quickly that image could be shattered. She had thought she was invincible, but the microphone, the laughter, and the moment on stage had shown her just how fragile everything really was. After what felt like an eternity, the girl finally took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let this define her, she told herself. But as the embarrassment began to fade, she realized something important. This moment, as painful as it was, had taught her more about herself than she had expected. The girl began to understand that her confidence had been based on appearances, on the way others saw her. But the true measure of a person wasn't about how they looked or what they had. It was about how they handled failure, how they responded when things didn't go as planned. She glanced over at the waitress, who had been watching from the side. The girl's eyes met the waitress's for a brief moment. It wasn't a look of mockery or judgment. Instead, there was something like understanding. The waitress had seen it all before, people who were quick to judge others, only to be brought down to earth in the most unexpected ways. The girl's pride had been shattered, but in its place something more genuine was starting to grow. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time that night, she felt a sense of clarity. This moment was more than just embarrassment. It was a chance to change. As the performance finally ended, the girl stood still, trying to regain some sense of control over herself. The audience, while still entertained by the chaos of the moment, had softened their laughter. The girl could feel their gaze, no longer one of admiration, but more like curiosity mixed with sympathy. It was strange, this sudden shift in how people looked at her. She had spent so much of her life wanting to be admired, to be the center of attention. But now, she realized, being admired wasn't the same as being respected. The girl slowly walked off the stage, her heart still racing. Her friends, who had once cheered her on, didn't know how to react. Some of them gave awkward half-smiles, while others simply avoided eye contact. The girl felt the silence between them, the uncomfortable gap that had grown in just a few moments. It was as if they too were unsure of what had just happened. She had expected them to support her, but now she felt alone in her humiliation. When she returned to her seat, the waitress was passing by with another round of drinks for another table. The girl hesitated for a moment before speaking up. The words felt strange, unfamiliar to her, as she had never needed to apologize to someone like this before. She had always been the one who had the upper hand, the one who could demand respect and get it. But now, she saw the waitress in a different light. "Hey," the girl said quietly, her voice soft. The waitress turned, giving her a polite smile, not expecting anything from her. The girl took a deep breath, the weight of her earlier words and actions suddenly crashing down on her. "I'm really sorry for what I said earlier. I shouldn't have treated you like that." The waitress paused, looking at her with a calm and understanding expression. She didn't say anything at first, as if she was letting the girl's words sink in. Then, with a small smile, she replied, "It's okay. We all have our moments." The girl, still feeling the sting of her earlier arrogance, nodded. For the first time that night, she realized how much she had taken for granted. She had spent so much time believing she was above others, only to find herself humbled in a way she had never imagined. The moment of embarrassment, as painful as it was, had cracked open her self-importance and allowed her to see things clearly. As the girl sat back down, the laughter from earlier still echoed in her mind, but it no longer felt like something to hide from. Instead, it was a reminder that life wasn't just about showing off, about impressing others with wealth or status. It was about treating people with respect, understanding that no one was better than anyone else, and realizing that sometimes the universe had a funny way of teaching lessons. Tonight, the girl had learned one of those lessons the hard way, but she knew that she wouldn't forget it. She glanced at the waitress one more time, offering a small, genuine smile. The girl wasn't the same person she had been when she walked into that restaurant. And though she wasn't sure exactly how this new perspective would change her, she knew that something had shifted inside her. This night, with all its embarrassment and discomfort, had opened her eyes to something far more important than anything she could buy or show off.